The thundering of hooves in the distance was the only warning Evelyn Moore had before 4 riders crested the hill overlooking her struggling ranch. She straightened from the fence post she'd been desperately trying to secure, wiping sweat from her brow with a dusty sleeve. The Arizona Territory sun beat down mercilessly, and the last thing she needed was more trouble riding onto her land. "Pa left me this ranch, and I'll be damned if I let it fail," she muttered to herself, squinting against the harsh light of the summer of 1882. At 24, Evelyn had seen more hardship than most women twice her age. 3 years a widow, 6 months an orphan, and now the sole proprietor of the Crescent Moon Ranch, a property that seemed determined to break both her back and her spirit. The riders approached at a steady pace, and Evelyn reached for the rifle she kept propped against the fence. Not that she was looking for a fight, but a woman alone in the Arizona Territory couldn't be too careful. As they drew closer, she recognized the lead rider as Bernard Thompson, the banker who'd been pressuring her to sell since her father's passing. The 3 men with him were strangers, though one stood out immediately. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet confidence that set him apart from Thompson's usual lackeys. He wore a dark Stetson pulled low over his eyes, but she could see the shadow of a beard on his sun-bronzed face. "Miss Moore," Thompson called out with false cheer as they reined in their horses a respectful distance away. "I trust you've reconsidered my offer." Evelyn's grip tightened on her rifle. "My answer hasn't changed, Mr. Thompson. The Crescent Moon isn't for sale." Thompson's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Miss Moore, I don't think you fully appreciate your situation. This land would serve better as part of the Silverton Mining Company's operations. I'm prepared to offer you $500 more than fair given the state of things." He gestured broadly at the dilapidated barn, the untended fields, and the small herd of cattle that had dwindled alarmingly since her father's death. "The answer is still no," Evelyn said firmly, though inside she was calculating how much longer she could hold out. The well was running dry, both literally and figuratively. The drought had lasted longer than anyone had anticipated, and her funds were nearly depleted. "Miss Moore, be reasonable," Thompson continued, his patience clearly wearing thin. "A woman alone has no business running a ranch this size. You're inviting tragedy." Before Evelyn could respond, the tall stranger shifted in his saddle. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice deep and calm, "I believe the lady has made her position clear." Thompson turned to him, clearly annoyed. "Zeke, I'm handling this." The man named Zeke shrugged. "Just seems to me that badgering a lady isn't going to change her mind." Evelyn studied him more carefully. There was something in his manner that suggested he wasn't just another of Thompson's men. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality, and the gun at his hip looked well cared for but frequently used. "This doesn't concern you," Thompson snapped, then turned back to Evelyn. "Miss Moore, I'll give you 1 more week to reconsider. After that, I can't guarantee what might happen. These are dangerous times for those who don't know when to accept help." The threat wasn't subtle. Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she refused to show fear. "Good day, Mr. Thompson." With a curt nod, Thompson wheeled his horse around. His 2 companions followed immediately, but Zeke lingered for a moment, his eyes meeting Evelyn's. There was something in that gaze, an apology, perhaps, or a warning before he too turned his horse and rode away. Evelyn watched them go, her heart pounding. The encounter had left her shaken, though she'd die before admitting it. Once the riders disappeared over the hill, she returned to her fence post with renewed determination, though her hands trembled slightly as she worked. 2 days later, Evelyn woke before dawn as usual. She dressed quickly in her work clothes, a simple cotton shirt and sturdy trousers that had once belonged to her father, now altered to fit her smaller frame. Proper ladies' attire had no place on a working ranch, though she kept a few dresses for trips into town. She made her way to the kitchen, stoking the fire in the stove before putting on a pot of coffee. The morning routine was comforting in its familiarity, one of the few constants left in her life. As the coffee brewed, she stepped onto the porch to survey her land in the gray pre-dawn light. The sight that greeted her made her freeze. A man was moving around her barn, leading out her work horse and hitching it to the plow. Even in the dim light, she recognized the tall, broad-shouldered silhouette from Thompson's visit. Anger flared hot in her chest as she darted back inside for her rifle. Stepping back onto the porch, she raised it to her shoulder and called out, "That's far enough, mister. State your business or get off my land." The man stopped, turning slowly with his hands raised shoulder high. "Morning, Miss Moore. Name's Zeke Callahan. Thought I might lend a hand. I don't recall asking for help, especially not from one of Thompson's men." "Not his man," Zeke replied easily. "Just rode in with him, because we were headed the same way." "I'm my own man, Miss Moore." Evelyn kept the rifle steady. "That doesn't explain what you're doing on my property at dawn. Saw you trying to work this place alone. Figured you could use some help." He gestured toward the fields. "That south pasture needs plowing if you're planning to plant anything this season. And why would you care about my planting schedule?" Zeke shrugged, his hands still raised. "Been drifting a while. Looking for honest work. You need help, I need work." Seemed simple enough. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "I can't pay you." "Room and board would do for now," he replied. "Maybe a small cut when things improve." She almost laughed at that. "If things improve, you mean?" A hint of a smile crossed his face.
"When?"
"I've worked enough ranches to know this one has good bones. Just needs some attention." Evelyn lowered the rifle slightly, but didn't put it down. Trust didn't come easily these days. "How do I know Thompson didn't send you to spy? Or worse?" "You don't," Zeke admitted. "But I give you my word I'm not working for him. And a man's word still means something out here." Evelyn studied him in the growing light. He was older than she'd first thought, mid-30s perhaps, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years under the sun. His clothes were dusty but well-mended, his boots worn but cared for. Nothing about him screamed wealth or privilege, but there was a quiet dignity in the way he held himself. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why help a stranger?" Something flickered across his face, a memory, perhaps. "Let's just say I know what it's like to fight against odds that seem stacked against you." Evelyn considered her options. The truth was, she desperately needed help. The ranch was too much for one person, even if she worked from sunup to sundown. Pride was one thing, but stubbornness to the point of failure was another. "1 week," she finally said, lowering the rifle completely. "You get room in the barn meals, and we'll see how it goes." Zeke nodded, lowering his hands. "Fair enough. I'll start with that south pasture, then see to the fence line on the west side. Noticed it's down in a few places." "How did you—" "Rode the perimeter yesterday evening," he explained. "Wanted to get a sense of what needs doing." Evelyn frowned at his presumption but couldn't argue with his initiative. "There's coffee in the kitchen when you're ready," she said, then turned and went back inside before he could see the relief on her face. By midday, Evelyn had to admit that Zeke Callahan knew his way around a ranch. He'd plowed more of the south pasture in a morning than she could have managed in 2 days. Now he was working on the broken fence line, his movements efficient and practiced. She approached with a canteen of water, watching him work for a moment before announcing her presence. "Thought you might be thirsty." He looked up, pushing his hat back slightly. "Obliged," he said, taking the canteen and drinking deeply. Water trickled down his beard, and he wiped it away with the back of his hand. "Good land you've got here. Been neglected some, but nothing that can't be fixed." "My father took sick last winter," Evelyn said, feeling oddly defensive. "I did what I could, but caring for him took priority." Zeke nodded. "No need to explain. Life happens." He handed the canteen back. "Sorry about your father. Must have been a good man to raise a daughter who'd fight this hard for his legacy." The simple acknowledgement of her struggle caught Evelyn off guard. Most men in town just thought she was being stubborn or foolish. "He was," she said softly. "Taught me everything I know about ranching. Said a woman could do anything a man could do, just had to want it bad enough." "Smart man," Zeke commented, returning to his work on the fence. "Though I imagine even he would have accepted help when it was offered in good faith." Evelyn bristled slightly. "I accepted yours, didn't I?" After pointing a rifle at me, he reminded her, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. "A woman alone can't be too careful." Zeke's expression sobered. "No, I suppose not." Thompson's threats weren't exactly subtle. Evelyn sighed, leaning against a nearby post. "It's not just Thompson. Half the town thinks I should sell and move somewhere more suitable for a lady. As if I should just abandon everything my parents built because it's not considered proper for a woman to run a ranch. And the other half is just waiting for me to fail so they can buy the land cheap." She shook her head. "Nobody thinks I can do this." Zeke drove another post into the ground with powerful strokes of the mallet. "Do you think you can do it, I mean?" The question caught her by surprise. She'd been so busy defending her right to try that she hadn't allowed herself to question whether success was possible. "I have to," she finally said. "This land is all I have left." Zeke nodded, as if her answer told him everything he needed to know. "Well, that fence on the north side won't fix itself. I'll head there after I finish this section." Evelyn recognized the dismissal, but found herself lingering. "There's stew for supper." "Nothing fancy, but it's hot. Looking forward to it," he said, already focused back on his work. As she walked away, Evelyn realized it was the longest conversation she'd had with anyone in months. Living alone had made her forget how to talk to people. Or maybe she'd never really known. Growing up on an isolated ranch with just her parents for company, she'd always been more comfortable with animals than people. That evening, Evelyn set the table for two, something she hadn't done since her father passed. When Zeke came in from washing up at the pump outside, he removed his hat and stood awkwardly at the door. "Come in," she said, placing a bowl of stew on the table. "It's nothing special, but it's filling." "Smells good," he said, taking the seat across from her. "Been a while since I had a home-cooked meal." "Where are you from, Mr. Callahan?" Evelyn asked as they began to eat. "Zeke is fine," he said. "Originally from Texas. Left after the war." "Which side?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. A shadow crossed his face. "Confederate, though not by choice." Texas didn't give young men many options back then. Evelyn nodded, understanding. Her own father had managed to avoid the conflict entirely, being too far west and too established on his land to be drafted. "Been drifting since?" she asked. "More or less. Worked ranches from Texas to California. Did some scouting for the Army for a while. Tried my hand at mining but didn't take to it." He took another spoonful of stew. "This is good, by the way." "Thank you." Evelyn was surprised by how easily conversation flowed with this stranger. "How did you end up riding with Thompson?" Zeke's expression darkened slightly. "Met him in town. He was hiring men for some property negotiation, as he put it. Didn't realize what that meant until we rode out here." "And yet you came back." He met her gaze directly. "Didn't sit right with me. Threatening a woman trying to make her way. Figured if Thompson wanted this land so badly, there must be something worth fighting for." "There is," Evelyn said quietly. "There's water. A natural spring that feeds the creek on the north side of the property. It's why the land stays green even in drought years." Understanding dawned on Zeke's face. "And with the new railroad spur coming through, water will be worth more than gold," Evelyn finished. "Thompson knows it. He's buying up all the land with reliable water sources for the mining company." "Smart," Zeke commented. "Ruthless, but smart. My father refused to sell. I'm honoring his wishes." Zeke studied her for a moment. Is that the only reason? Honoring your father's wishes. Evelyn set down her spoon, surprised by the directness of the question. No, she admitted. This land is special. My parents came here with nothing, built everything from scratch. Every fence post, every board in this house, my father placed it with his own hands. My mother planted those cottonwoods by the creek. Their whole lives are in this soil. She met his gaze steadily. I won't let Thompson destroy that for profit. Zeke nodded slowly. Good reason. He finished his stew in silence, then said, Thank you for the meal. I should turn in if we're getting an early start tomorrow. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Figure we should start moving the cattle to the north pasture. Better grazing there, and it'll give the south field time to recover after plowing. Evelyn blinked, surprised by his presumption but unable to argue with his logic. Yes, that makes sense. Zeke stood, placing his hat back on his head. Good night, Miss Moore. Evelyn, she corrected, surprising herself. If I'm calling you Zeke, you might as well use my name. A small smile touched his lips. Good night, Evelyn. After he left, Evelyn sat at the table for a long time, wondering what she'd gotten herself into by allowing this stranger into her life. Yet for the first time in months, she felt a small flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. Over the next few days, Evelyn found herself falling into a rhythm with Zeke that felt surprisingly natural. They rose before dawn, worked until the heat of the day became unbearable, then resumed in the late afternoon until dusk. Conversation was minimal during working hours, but the silence was comfortable rather than strained. During evening meals, Evelyn learned more about the man she'd reluctantly allowed to stay. Zeke was educated, he could read and write better than most men she'd known, though he never boasted about it. He'd seen much of the West, from the plains of Texas to the mountains of Colorado. He spoke little of his family, mentioning only that his parents had died young, and he had no siblings. On the fourth day, they moved the cattle to the north pasture, working in tandem as if they'd been partners for years rather than days. Evelyn had always been good with horses, but Zeke had a way with cattle that bordered on uncanny. They seemed to respond to his voice alone, moving where he directed with minimal fuss. Where did you learn to handle cattle like that? Evelyn asked as they rode back to the ranch house, the day's work successfully completed. Zeke shrugged. Worked a few cattle drives from Texas to Kansas. You learn quick, or you don't last. I've never been further east than Tucson, Evelyn admitted. Always wanted to see more of the country, but the ranch needed you, Zeke finished for her. She nodded. First it was helping Pa, then it was keeping things going when he got sick. After he died, there was just too much to do to even think about leaving. What about your husband? Zeke asked, the question gentle but direct. Evelyn's hands tightened on the reins. Few people asked her about Michael anymore. He died 3 years ago. Mining accident over in Tombstone. We'd only been married a year. I'm sorry, Zeke said, and she could tell he meant it. We grew up together, Evelyn found herself explaining. Our families' ranches bordered each other. When his parents lost their land during the drought of '76, he turned to mining. Said he'd earn enough to buy back the land. But she trailed off, the familiar ache of loss washing over her. Life had other plans, Zeke finished quietly. Evelyn nodded, surprised at how easy it was to talk to him about Michael. She rarely spoke of her late husband, finding most people's responses either too pitying or too dismissive. Did you ever marry? She asked, turning the conversation away from her loss. A shadow crossed Zeke's face.
No.
Came close once, back in Texas before the war. Elizabeth was her name. His voice softened on the name. Her father didn't approve of a man with no prospects. Then the war came, and when I returned, she'd married a banker from Austin. I'm sorry, Evelyn echoed his earlier sentiment. Zeke shrugged, but she could see the old wound still pained him. For the best, probably. I wasn't the same man who left. They rode in silence for a while, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and crimson. Evelyn found herself studying Zeke's profile, the strong jaw covered in a neatly trimmed beard, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled, the straight nose that had clearly been broken at least once. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his face, a character that spoke of experiences both hard and meaningful. She quickly looked away when he turned toward her, not wanting to be caught staring. "There's a storm coming," he said, nodding toward the western horizon where dark clouds were gathering. "Might want to secure anything that could blow away." Evelyn welcomed the change of subject. "I'll check the chicken coop and barn. The north corner of the barn roof is weak, might need reinforcing." By the time they reached the ranch, the wind had picked up considerably. They worked quickly to secure the property, Zeke reinforcing the barn roof, while Evelyn made sure the animals were safely sheltered. The first fat drops of rain were beginning to fall as they finished. "Get inside," Zeke called over the rising wind. "I'll make one more check of the barn." Evelyn nodded, hurrying toward the house as the rain intensified. She'd just reached the porch when a tremendous crack of lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening thunderclap. The sudden illumination showed Zeke still at the barn door and revealed a section of the roof beginning to tear away. "Zeke," she shouted, but her voice was lost in the howling wind. Without thinking, she dashed back out into the storm, rain instantly soaking her clothes. She reached the barn just as Zeke was emerging. "The roof," she shouted, pointing upward. He followed her gaze, then grabbed her arm, pulling her inside the barn. "We need to secure it from inside," he explained, his voice raised to be heard over the storm. "Otherwise it'll tear completely off." Together they worked to brace the weakened section, using rope and spare lumber to reinforce the structure from within. The work was difficult in the dim light, with rain leaking through in several places, but they managed to create a temporary solution that would hold until the storm passed. As they finished, Evelyn became acutely aware of how close they were standing, both soaked to the skin and breathing hard from exertion. Zeke seemed to realize it at the same moment, taking a small step back. "That should hold," he said, his voice rough. "We should get to the house before it gets worse." They made a dash for the house, the rain now coming down in sheets. By the time they reached the porch, they were both drenched and shivering. Inside, Evelyn quickly built up the fire while Zeke fetched towels. "You should change," he said, handing her a towel and deliberately looking away. "I'll wait here." Evelyn nodded, suddenly self-conscious of how her wet clothes clung to her body. She retreated to her bedroom, changing quickly into a dry dress before returning to the main room with a blanket and some of her father's old clothes. "These might fit you," she said, holding them out to Zeke. "You can change in my father's room. First door on the left." Zeke accepted the clothes with a nod of thanks and disappeared down the hallway. Evelyn busied herself making coffee, trying not to think about the man changing clothes in her father's room. When Zeke returned, wearing her father's flannel shirt and trousers that were slightly too short but otherwise fit reasonably well, Evelyn felt an unexpected pang at the sight. "Coffee," she offered, holding out a cup. "Thank you," he said, accepting it gratefully. His hair was damp and curling slightly at the ends, making him look younger somehow. They sat before the fire, the storm raging outside. The wind howled around the eaves of the house, and rain lashed against the windows, but inside was warm and surprisingly cozy. "Thank you," Evelyn said after a while, "for helping with the barn. And everything else." Zeke looked at her over the rim of his coffee cup. "Just doing what needs doing." "Still, you didn't have to stay. You could have moved on after seeing what you were getting into here." "Could have," he agreed. "Didn't want to." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Evelyn found herself studying his face again, trying to understand this man who had ridden into her life so unexpectedly. "Why?" she asked finally. Why stay and help a stranger? Zeke set his cup down, considering her question seriously. When I rode in with Thompson and saw how he was treating you, it reminded me of something I've seen too often, people with power using it to take from those with less. After the war, I swore I'd never stand by and watch that happen again, if I could help it. So, I'm your good deed? Evelyn couldn't keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. No, Zeke said firmly. You're someone fighting for something that matters, something worth protecting. That's rare enough these days to be worth supporting. His honest answer disarmed her completely. For so long, Evelyn had been defensive, expecting everyone to question her capabilities or motives. Zeke's straightforward respect for her struggle left her momentarily speechless. The fire crackled in the silence between them, casting dancing shadows across the room. Outside, the storm continued unabated, rain drumming steadily on the roof. My week is almost up, Zeke said finally. Evelyn looked up sharply. She'd almost forgotten their original agreement. So it is. Would you be willing to extend it? There's still much to be done before the ranch is back on its feet. Relief flooded through her, though she tried not to show it. I still can't pay you much. I'm not asking for much, he replied. Just a fair share when things improve. Evelyn studied him, trying to discern his true motives. Finding no deception in his steady gaze, she nodded slowly. All right. You can stay until the fall, at least. By then we'll know if the crops take and how the cattle are faring. Deal, Zeke said, extending his hand. Evelyn took it, noting the calluses that spoke of years of hard work and the gentle strength in his grip. When their hands parted, she felt an unexpected sense of loss. I should check that the roof isn't leaking, she said, standing abruptly. I'll take the barn for the night, Zeke said, also rising. Need to keep an eye on those repairs anyway. No, Evelyn found herself saying. The storm's too fierce. You can take my father's room for tonight. Zeke hesitated, clearly weighing propriety against practicality. If you're sure it's appropriate. There's nothing appropriate about letting someone sleep in a leaking barn during a storm like this, Evelyn said firmly. Besides, there's no one here to gossip about it anyway. A small smile touched his lips. Fair point. Thank you. Later, lying in her bed listening to the storm, Evelyn was acutely aware of Zeke's presence in the room across the hall. It had been so long since anyone besides her had slept in the house that the very air seemed different, somehow charged with a new energy she couldn't quite name. She told herself it was just the storm making her fanciful, but in her heart, she knew it was something else entirely. Something both frightening and exhilarating that she wasn't ready to acknowledge, even to herself. The morning after the storm dawned clear and brilliant, the air washed clean by the rain. Evelyn rose early, as was her habit, and found Zeke already in the kitchen, coffee brewing on the stove. Morning, he said, his voice still rough with sleep. Hope you don't mind. Figured you'd want coffee ready. Thank you, she said, oddly touched by the thoughtfulness. You're up early. Always have been, he replied, pouring her a cup. Besides, need to check the barn roof in daylight. They moved around the kitchen with surprising ease, preparing a simple breakfast together. Evelyn found herself watching Zeke's hands as he sliced bread, strong, capable hands that had done so much to help her in just a few days. After breakfast, they inspected the damage from the storm. The barn roof would need proper repairs, but Zeke's temporary fix had held through the worst of it. A few fence posts had been damaged by lightning, and one of the smaller outbuildings had lost some siding, but overall, they had weathered the storm well. Could have been much worse, Zeke commented as they walked the property. Land took the rain well. Should help with the planting. Evelyn nodded, noticing how the parched earth had already responded to the moisture, hints of green appearing where before there had been only dusty brown. We should get those seeds in the ground while the soil's damp, she suggested. Zeke agreed, and they spent the day planting the south field with corn and beans, crops that would feed them through the winter and provide some surplus to sell, if they were lucky. Working side by side under the warm sun, Evelyn found herself relaxing in Zeke's company in a way she hadn't with anyone in years. By the time evening fell, they were both exhausted but satisfied with the day's work. They ate dinner on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. "My mother used to say a sunset like that means good luck is coming," Evelyn said, the memory surfacing unexpectedly. Zeke smiled. "My grandmother had a saying too, red sky at night, sailor's delight." Was she from the coast? "Originally from Virginia," Zeke explained, "near the Chesapeake. She knew a lot about weather from watching the water." "I've never seen the ocean," Evelyn admitted. "Always wanted to." "It's something," Zeke said, his eyes distant with memory. "Went to Galveston once as a boy. Never forgot the sight of all that water stretching to the horizon. Makes a person feel small in the best possible way." "How do you mean?" He considered for a moment. "When your problems seem big, seeing something that vast puts things in perspective. Reminds you that the world is bigger than your troubles." Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. "I get that feeling sometimes looking at the stars out here. Makes my worries seem smaller." They fell into a comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. "Thompson will be back," Zeke said finally, his voice low. Evelyn sighed. "I know. His week is almost up." "What will you do?" "Same thing I've been doing. Tell him no." She turned to look at Zeke. "What will you do when he comes?" Zeke met her gaze steadily. "Stand with you, if you'll let me." The simple declaration sent an unexpected warmth through Evelyn's chest. For so long, she had stood alone against the world, convinced that she must handle everything by herself. The offer of alliance was both tempting and terrifying. "Why?" she asked, echoing her question from the night before. "Why risk making an enemy of a powerful man like Thompson for a ranch that isn't yours?" Zeke was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "After the war, I drifted for years. Took jobs where I could find them, moved on when things got complicated. Never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots." He looked out at the land stretching before them, bathed in the last light of day. "Maybe I'm tired of drifting. Maybe I see something worth fighting for here." His gaze returned to her face, and Evelyn felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Both had lost much. Both were searching for something solid in a world that seemed increasingly built on shifting sand. "Well," she said finally, her voice softer than she intended, "I won't turn away help freely offered." The smile that spread across Zeke's face transformed his features, erasing years of weariness in an instant. "Good. Because I'm not going anywhere." The certainty in his voice should have alarmed her. It was too soon for such declarations, too soon to trust so completely. Yet Evelyn found herself believing him, and more surprisingly, welcoming his commitment to stay. As darkness fell completely, they remained on the porch, talking of practical matters, what seeds to plant next, which fences needed the most urgent repairs, how to increase the water flow to the south pasture. But beneath the practical conversation ran a current of something deeper, something neither was quite ready to name, but both could feel growing between them. When they finally retired for the night, Zeke to the barn and Evelyn to her room, she found herself standing at her window, looking out at the barn where a single lantern glowed. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Evelyn went to sleep with a sense of hope rather than dread about what the next day might bring. True to Zeke's prediction, Bernard Thompson returned exactly 1 week after his previous visit. This time, he brought 5 men with him, their expressions grim and purposeful. Evelyn and Zeke were working in the corral when the riders approached. Without a word, they both set down their tools and moved to stand on the porch, presenting a united front. Evelyn wore her father's old revolver on her hip, and Zeke stood slightly behind her right shoulder, his own weapon visible, but not threatening. "Miss Moore," Thompson called as the group reined in their horses. "I see you've acquired help since our last conversation." "Mr. Thompson," Evelyn acknowledged coolly. "Mr. Callahan works for me now. Have you reconsidered your approach to business negotiations?" Thompson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Always the spirited one. "I've come to present my final offer. $700 for the property, considerably more than it's worth in its current state." "Still not for sale," Evelyn replied, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. 5 men against 2 weren't odds she liked, but she wouldn't show fear. Thompson's smile faded. "Miss Moore, you're testing my patience. The Silverton Mining Company has invested considerable resources in developing this region. Your stubbornness is impeding progress." "Funny thing about progress," Zeke spoke up, his voice deceptively casual. "Seems to mean different things to different people. To some, it means respecting property rights and dealing honestly." Thompson's cold gaze shifted to Zeke. "This doesn't concern you, Callahan." "I work here," Zeke replied evenly. "That makes it my concern." Thompson's expression hardened. "I'd heard you were looking for work. Didn't expect you to throw in with a losing proposition." "I choose my employers carefully," Zeke said. "Prefer those with integrity." The implied insult wasn't lost on Thompson, whose face flushed with anger. "Miss Moore," he said, returning his attention to Evelyn, "I'll give you one more opportunity to be reasonable. Otherwise, I cannot be responsible for what might happen." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Thompson?" Evelyn asked, her hand moving subtly closer to her revolver. "Merely stating facts," Thompson replied smoothly. "These are dangerous times. Accidents happen. Fires start. Cattle wander off or are rustled." "A woman alone, she's not alone," Zeke interrupted, his voice hard as steel. Thompson studied them both, clearly reassessing the situation. One man won't make much difference against the sort of troubles that can befall an isolated ranch. "Maybe not," Zeke agreed. "But folks in town might start asking questions if too many accidents happen out here, especially after such public threats." A tense silence followed his words. Evelyn could see Thompson calculating, weighing his options. Finally, the banker straightened in his saddle. "Very well, Miss Moore. Since you insist on being difficult, I'll take my business elsewhere for now. But remember, land values can fall as well as rise. When you're ready to sell for a more realistic price, you know where to find me." Without waiting for a response, Thompson wheeled his horse around and rode away, his men following close behind. Evelyn released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That went better than I expected." "Don't be fooled," Zeke warned, watching the riders disappear down the road. "He's not giving up. Just changing tactics." "What do you think he'll do?" Zeke considered for a moment. "Nothing direct. He's too careful for that. But he might try to pressure you in other ways, have the bank call in loans, get merchants to refuse your business, spread rumors in town." Evelyn frowned. "I don't have any bank loans, thankfully. Pa always believed in staying debt-free. As for the rest..." She shrugged. "Most folks in town already think I'm a fool for trying to run this place. Their opinion can't get much lower. All the same, we should be prepared." Zeke turned to her, his expression serious. "You should know what you're facing by refusing him." "I know exactly what I'm facing," Evelyn replied firmly. "I've been fighting this battle since Pa died. The only difference now is that I'm not fighting alone." She met his gaze directly. "Am I?" The question hung between them, both a challenge and a plea. Zeke held her gaze steadily. "No," he said simply. "You're not alone anymore." Something in his tone made Evelyn's heart beat faster. For a moment, they stood looking at each other, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Then Zeke cleared his throat and glanced away. "We should finish that corral fence before dark," he said, his voice deliberately casual. Evelyn nodded, grateful for the return to practical matters. Yes, we should. As they walked back to their work, Evelyn found herself studying Zeke's profile, wondering what had brought this man to her ranch and why he seemed so determined to help her. Trust didn't come easily to her anymore, but despite her best efforts to maintain her walls, she found herself beginning to trust Zeke Callahan. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn and Zeke fell into a comfortable routine. They rose before dawn, worked through the cool morning hours, rested during the hottest part of the day, then resumed work until dusk. Under their combined efforts, the ranch began to show signs of recovery, fences repaired, fields planted, cattle healthier, and increasing in number as lost calves were found and brought back to the herd. True to Zeke's prediction, Thompson's tactics became more indirect. On her monthly trip into town for supplies, Evelyn found some merchants suddenly claiming to be out of items she needed or quoting prices far above what she'd paid previously. The local newspaper ran a story about the economic benefits of the silver mining company's expansion plans, with thinly veiled criticism of obstructionist landowners impeding progress. Most painful was the change in how some townspeople treated her. People who had known her family for years now avoided her gaze or cut conversations short when she approached. Not everyone. Of course, there were still those who greeted her warmly and expressed concern for her welfare. But the division was clear and growing. "Don't let it trouble you," Zeke advised when she returned from town, frustrated and hurt by the treatment. "Thompson can buy some people's loyalty, but not everyone's." "It's not just that," Evelyn admitted as they unloaded supplies from the wagon. "It's knowing that people I've known all my life think I'm being foolish or selfish for holding on to the ranch." Zeke set down a sack of flour, turning to face her directly. "Are you beginning to think they're right?" "No," she said immediately, then hesitated. "Maybe. I don't know anymore. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being stubborn just for the sake of it. If Pa were here, if your father were here," Zeke interrupted gently, "he'd be fighting just as hard as you are. You said yourself he refused to sell to Thompson." "Yes, but no buts," Zeke said firmly. "This land is worth fighting for, Evelyn. Not just because of the water or what it might be worth someday, but because of what it means, what it represents." "And what's that?" Evelyn asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Zeke gestured broadly at the ranch around them. "Independence. Self-determination. The right to build something with your own hands and call it yours. Isn't that what the West is supposed to be about?" His passion surprised her. In the weeks they'd worked together, Zeke had been steady and reliable, but rarely demonstrative. Seeing this flash of intensity reminded her that there was much about him she still didn't know. "You sound like you've given this a lot of thought," she observed. A shadow crossed his face. "The war taught me the cost of letting others determine your fate. After that, well, a man develops certain convictions about what's worth fighting for." Evelyn studied him, struck once again by the sense that Zeke Callahan was a man shaped by experiences he rarely spoke about. "And this ranch is worth fighting for?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "But more importantly, your right to keep it is worth fighting for." His words touched something deep within her, a need to be understood, to have her struggle validated. For so long, she had carried the weight of her decision alone, questioning herself in the dark hours of the night when doubts crept in. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to express the full measure of her gratitude. Zeke nodded, seeming to understand what she couldn't say. They returned to unloading the supplies, working in companionable silence. But something had shifted between them, a deepening of trust, a strengthening of the bond that had been forming since his arrival. That evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, Evelyn found herself studying Zeke's profile in the fading light. He'd been with her for nearly a month now, and in that time, the ranch had transformed in ways she wouldn't have thought possible. Fences repaired, fields planted, The barn roof fixed properly all tasks she would have struggled to complete alone. But it wasn't just the physical improvements to the ranch that made his presence valuable. It was the way the burden of responsibility felt lighter when shared, the comfort of having someone to discuss decisions with, the simple pleasure of having company after so many months of solitude. "Penny for your thoughts," Zeke said, catching her gaze. Evelyn smiled, embarrassed at being caught staring. "Just thinking about how much has changed since you arrived." "For the better, I hope?" "Definitely for the better," she assured him. "I'm not sure I've properly thanked you for all you've done." Zeke shook his head. "No thanks needed. We made a deal, remember? Room and board for work. Fair exchange." "It's been more than fair on my side," Evelyn insisted. "You've done the work of 3 men, and all I've given you is a place to sleep and meals. And good company," Zeke added with a small smile. "Don't discount that. Gets lonely on the trail." The casual comment reminded Evelyn of how little she knew about his life before he arrived at her ranch. "Where were you headed when you rode in with Thompson?" she asked. "Before you decided to stay, I mean." Zeke was quiet for a moment, considering. "Nowhere in particular," he finally said. "Been drifting for so long, one place seemed as good as another." "That sounds lonely." "It was," he admitted, surprising her with his candor. "After the war, I couldn't settle. Kept thinking the next place would feel like home, but it never did." He looked out at the darkening land before them. "Started to think maybe home wasn't a place I'd find, but something I'd left behind for good." "And now?" Evelyn asked softly. Zeke turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the last light of day. "Now I'm not so sure." The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Evelyn felt her heart beat faster, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the mild evening. Before she could respond, a distant sound caught their attention: horses approaching at a gallop. They both stood instantly alert. Visitors after dark rarely brought good news. "Get inside," Zeke said, his hand moving to his gun. "Could be trouble." Evelyn shook her head. "No. If it's trouble, we face it together." He looked like he wanted to argue but nodded instead. They both moved to the edge of the porch, straining to see in the gathering darkness. 3 riders emerged from the shadows, pulling their lather horses to a stop in front of the house. Evelyn recognized them as hands from the neighboring Turner Ranch. "Miss Moore," the lead rider called, his voice urgent. "Fire at the north boundary. Spreading fast with the wind." Evelyn's blood ran cold. The north boundary was where their best grazing land lay, adjacent to the creek fed by the natural spring, the water source Thompson coveted. "How bad?" Zeke demanded, already moving toward the barn. "Bad enough," the rider replied. "Mr. Turner sent us to help. He's gathering more men from town. Get lanterns and shovels from the barn," Evelyn instructed, her mind racing. "I'll fetch blankets for beating out the flames." Within minutes, they were mounted and riding hard toward the north boundary, the glow of flames visible against the night sky long before they reached it. As they crested the last hill, Evelyn's heart sank at the sight before them. A wall of fire stretched across her best pastureland, consuming the dry grass with frightening speed. The cattle had fled to the far corner of the pasture, huddled together in terror. "We need to cut a firebreak," Zeke shouted over the roar of the flames. "Turner's men, start digging a line from the creek eastward. Evelyn and I will try to herd the cattle to safety." The men nodded, immediately dismounting and beginning to work. Evelyn followed Zeke toward the panicked cattle, her horse nervous beneath her as they approached the flames. For hours, they fought the fire with desperate determination. More help arrived from neighboring ranches and town, forming bucket lines from the creek and digging fire breaks to contain the spread. Evelyn worked alongside everyone, her face blackened with soot, her lungs burning from smoke, refusing to rest while her land and livelihood were at risk. Dawn was breaking when they finally managed to bring the fire under control. Exhausted, Evelyn stood at the edge of the burned area, surveying the damage. Nearly 100 acres of prime grazing land lay blackened and smoking, the grass completely destroyed. Several head of cattle had been lost, either to the flames or to panic-driven stampeding over the rough terrain. Could have been worse, Zeke said quietly, coming to stand beside her. His face was streaked with soot, his clothes singed in places. If Turner's men hadn't spotted it when they did. It wasn't an accident, Evelyn said, her voice hard with certainty. This was Thompson. Zeke nodded grimly. Likely so, though proving it will be another matter. He's escalating, Evelyn continued, anger building within her.
First the pressure in town, now this.
What's next? Burning the house? Shooting our cattle? We'll increase our vigilance, Zeke assured her. Post watches at night. I got friends who might be willing to ride for us for a while, good men I trust. Evelyn turned to him, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what they were facing. Why fight so hard for this, Zeke? Is it worth risking your life for land that isn't even yours? Zeke was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from the burned land to her face. It's not just about the land, Evelyn. Hasn't been for a while now. The simple statement sent a tremor through her. Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the approach of Samuel Turner, the owner of the neighboring ranch. Miss Moore. Turner greeted her, his weathered face grave. Terrible business, this fire. Any idea how it started? Evelyn exchanged a glance with Zeke. Samuel Turner was one of the few neighbors who had remained friendly despite Thompson's influence. Still, accusations without proof were dangerous. No idea, she replied carefully, though it's strange how it started at the farthest point from the ranch house, where we'd be least likely to spot it until it was well underway. Turner's eyes narrowed slightly. Strange indeed, almost as if someone wanted to do maximum damage before help could arrive. Almost, Zeke agreed. Turner nodded, understanding the unspoken suspicion. Well, Thompson was in the saloon last night, making no secret of his frustration with certain stubborn landowners. Bought drinks for anyone who'd listen to his complaints. An alibi, Zeke observed. A convenient one, Turner agreed. Miss Moore, I want you to know that not everyone in these parts supports Thompson's methods. My men and I stand ready to help if you need us. Thank you, Mr. Turner, Evelyn said, deeply touched by the offer. That means more than I can say. After Turner left, Evelyn and Zeke made their way back to the ranch house, both exhausted beyond words. The other firefighters had departed, leaving them alone with the aftermath of the night's events. You should rest, Zeke said as they entered the yard. I'll keep watch for a while. Evelyn shook her head. You're as exhausted as I am. We both need rest. Evelyn, no arguments, she insisted. If Thompson plans to try something else today, he'll find us both too tired to stop him anyway. Better to get some sleep and be alert later. Reluctantly, Zeke agreed. They took turns washing away the worst of the soot and grime at the pump, then entered the house together. At the hallway leading to the bedrooms, they paused. What you said earlier, Evelyn began hesitantly, about it not being just about the land. Zeke met her gaze steadily, despite his exhaustion. I meant it, but now's not the time for that conversation. We're both too tired to think clearly. Evelyn nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words, even as part of her longed to pursue the subject. Rest well then. You too, he said softly. As she closed her bedroom door behind her, Evelyn found herself thinking not of the fire or the damage to her land, but of the look in Zeke's eyes when he'd spoken those words. For the first time since Michael's death, she felt something stirring within her heart, something she had believed long buried beneath grief and responsibility and the daily struggle to survive. It terrified her almost as much as it gave her hope. The aftermath of the fire brought unexpected developments. Word spread quickly through the county about the suspicious blaze, and contrary to Thompson's likely expectations, public opinion began to shift. Many of the townspeople and neighboring ranchers who had been neutral or even supportive of the silver mining company's expansion plans now viewed the situation with new eyes. 3 days after the fire, Evelyn made another trip into town for supplies. This time, the reception was markedly different. Merchants who had previously been cool or evasive now greeted her warmly, offering fair prices and sometimes even discounts. Several people stopped her on the street to express sympathy about the fire and ask after her welfare. "Seems Thompson miscalculated," Zeke observed as they loaded their purchases into the wagon. "People might support progress and development, but most draw the line at arson and intimidation." "I just wish I could prove it was him," Evelyn said, frustration evident in her voice. "Everyone suspects, but without proof. Sometimes public opinion is more powerful than legal proof," Zeke pointed out. "Thompson relies on the goodwill of the community for his banking business. If enough people start questioning his methods, it could hurt him more than any legal action." As if summoned by their conversation, Bernard Thompson himself emerged from the bank across the street. He spotted them immediately, his face darkening. After a moment's hesitation, he crossed the street toward them. "Miss Moore," he greeted her, his tone carefully neutral. "I was sorry to hear about the fire on your property."
"Un terrible accident." "Was it?"
Evelyn replied coolly. Thompson's expression hardened slightly. "Fires are common enough in summer, particularly during drought conditions. Particularly when someone wants land badly enough to resort to criminal means to get it," Zeke added, his voice low but carrying enough that several passers-by slowed to listen. Thompson's face flushed with anger. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Callahan. One you'd be wise not to make without proof." "Not an accusation," Zeke replied easily. "Just an observation about human nature. Wouldn't you agree that some men value profit above honor?" Several onlookers had stopped now, watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. Thompson was clearly aware of the audience, his jaw tight with suppressed rage. "Miss Moore," he said, deliberately ignoring Zeke, "despite our differences, I would never wish harm to come to you or your property. My offer to purchase the Crescent Moon still stands now at $800, in light of your recent difficulties." "The answer remains no, Mr. Thompson," Evelyn said firmly, "and will continue to be no, regardless of what accidents might befall my ranch." Thompson's eyes narrowed. "You're making a grave mistake, continuing this foolish resistance. That land will never be profitable enough to sustain you." "Maybe it's not about profit," Evelyn replied. "Maybe it's about principle." "Principles don't feed cattle or repair fences," Thompson scoffed. "No," Zeke interjected, "but they do sustain the soul. Something you might have forgotten." A murmur ran through the growing crowd of onlookers. Thompson glanced around, clearly realizing that the public confrontation was not working in his favor. With a curt nod, he turned and walked back toward the bank, his shoulders rigid with anger. "That was quite a performance," Evelyn said quietly as they finished loading the wagon. "Not a performance," Zeke replied. "Just making sure the good people of this town understand exactly what's happening." As they drove the wagon out of town, Evelyn found herself reflecting on how much had changed in the weeks since Zeke's arrival. Not just the physical improvements to the ranch, but the shift in her own outlook. For months after her father's death, she had been merely surviving, going through the motions of running the ranch without any real hope for the future. Now, despite the fire and Thompson's continued threats, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, determination not just to endure, but to prevail. And she knew that much of that change was due to the man sitting beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of challenges they faced. "Thank you," she said suddenly. Zeke glanced at her, eyebrows raised in question. "For what?" "For staying. For believing in what I'm fighting for." She hesitated, then added softly, "For believing in me." Zeke's expression softened. "That's the easiest thing I've done in years." The simple sincerity of his words touched her deeply. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts but acutely aware of the other's presence. When they reached the ranch, they found Samuel Turner waiting for them, his expression grave. "Miss Moore, Mr. Callahan," he greeted them. "I'm afraid I bring troubling news." "What's happened?" Evelyn asked, immediately alert. "Two of my men discovered something while patrolling the boundary between our properties," Turner explained. "Evidence that the fire was deliberately set. Coal oil residue and several burned matches near where it started." Zeke's expression hardened. "That proves it was arson, but not who did it." "There's more," Turner continued. "One of my hands recognized a horse's tracks near the site, distinctive shoeing with a star pattern on the right front shoe. Belongs to a man named Jenkins who works for Thompson." Evelyn exchanged a glance with Zeke. "That's still not definitive proof," she said, though hope was rising within her. "It could be coincidence." "Perhaps," Turner agreed. But Jenkins was seen leaving town the afternoon before the fire, returning well after midnight. And when questioned at the saloon yesterday, he had fresh burns on his right hand that he couldn't explain. "You've been investigating," Zeke observed. Turner nodded. "As I said before, Miss Moore, not everyone supports Thompson's methods. Several of us have been making inquiries. Quietly for now." "What do you suggest we do with this information?" Evelyn asked. "For now, nothing public," Turner advised. "We continue gathering evidence. Meanwhile, I've arranged for some of my men to help patrol your boundaries at night. With your permission, of course." "That's very generous," Evelyn said, deeply moved by the offer. "It's self-interest as much as neighborliness," Turner admitted with a wry smile. "If Thompson succeeds in driving you out, my ranch could be next." He's made no secret of his desire to control all the water rights in the county. After Turner left, Evelyn and Zeke unloaded their supplies in thoughtful silence. The knowledge that they had allies was heartening, but Thompson's desperation made him more dangerous than ever. "He won't stop," Evelyn said finally. "Not until he gets what he wants or is forced to back down." "No," Zeke agreed. "But neither will we." The simple declaration, with its use of we rather than you, didn't escape Evelyn's notice. In just a few weeks, Zeke had become so integrated into her life and her struggle that it was difficult to remember a time before his arrival. The thought of facing this battle without him was increasingly unthinkable. That night, after supper, they sat on the porch as had become their custom. The evening was unusually cool for summer, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "Storm coming," Zeke observed, looking at the distant clouds gathering on the western horizon. "Good for the replanting we did in the burn section." Evelyn nodded, grateful for the prospect of rain. They had spent the past days spreading grass seed over the burned area, hoping to restore at least some of the pasture before winter. "Zeke," she said after a while, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." He turned to her, his expression open. "What's that?" "You've never really explained why you decided to stay that first day. You could have ridden on, found work somewhere without all this trouble." Zeke was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "Remember I told you about Elizabeth back in Texas?" Evelyn nodded, surprised by the shift in conversation. "What I didn't tell you was what happened after she married that banker," Zeke continued, his voice low. "Her husband used his position to pressure small farmers and ranchers into selling their land cheap. Foreclosed on families who'd worked their holdings for generations. All legal, all within his rights as a banker, but..." He shook his head. "It wasn't right, and when you saw Thompson pressuring me, it reminded you of that," Evelyn guessed. "Partly," Zeke acknowledged. "But it was more than that. When I rode up with Thompson that day and saw you standing your ground one woman against men who thought they could intimidate you into giving up what was rightfully yours, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time." "What's that?" "Courage," he said simply. "Real courage. Not the showy kind that men display in saloon fights or gunfights, but the quiet kind that gets up every day and faces impossible odds without complaint. He met her gaze directly. That's rare, Evelyn. Rare and worth protecting. Evelyn felt her cheeks warm at his words. I'm not sure it's courage so much as stubbornness, she said, attempting to lighten the suddenly intense mood. Zeke smiled. Maybe they're not so different. His expression grew serious again. But there's something else you should know. Something I haven't told you about my past. Evelyn tensed slightly, uncertain what revelation might be coming. What is it? Zeke took a deep breath. After the war, I did some things I'm not proud of. Rode with some men who operated on the wrong side of the law for a while. You were an outlaw? Evelyn asked, surprised but not as shocked as she might once have been. For a time, he admitted. Never killed anyone who wasn't trying to kill me first, but I helped rob a bank in Missouri, ran with a gang stealing horses in Kansas. He looked away, shame evident in his profile. Not my finest years. What changed? Evelyn asked quietly. We robbed a small bank in a town called Fairview. There was a woman there about your age, trying to withdraw money to buy medicine for her sick child. In the confusion, she was knocked down, hurt pretty badly. His voice grew strained with the memory. I helped her up, made sure she was all right, but later I found out her child died because she couldn't get the medicine in time. Evelyn reached out impulsively, placing her hand over his. I'm sorry. Zeke nodded, his hand turning to hold hers. That was the end for me. Left the gang that night, rode as far as I could in the opposite direction. Spent the next years trying to make up for what I'd done working honest jobs, helping where I could. He finally looked at her again. I wanted you to know. Before things between us go any further. The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Evelyn found herself at a crossroads, aware that her response now would define whatever future they might have. We all have regrets, Zeke, she said finally. Things we wish we'd done differently. What matters is who you are now, not who you were then. She squeezed his hand gently. And the man you are now is someone I'm proud to have beside me. Relief washed over his features, followed by something deeper, a warmth that made Evelyn's heart beat faster. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Zeke raised his free hand to her cheek, his touch feather light against her skin. Evelyn, he said, her name almost a whisper on his lips. Before he could continue, the distant sound of gunfire shattered the moment. They both jumped to their feet, instantly alert. That came from the north boundary, Zeke said, already moving toward the barn. Where the fire was. Evelyn followed quickly, fear clutching at her heart. Turner's men are patrolling there tonight. They saddled their horses with practiced efficiency and rode hard toward the sound of the gunfire, which had ceased by the time they left the yard. The night was dark, the approaching storm clouds obscuring the moon and stars, making their progress slower than they would have liked. As they neared the north boundary, they saw lantern light and heard voices. Drawing closer, they made out two of Turner's men and, to Evelyn's surprise, Sheriff Davis from town. Miss Moore, the sheriff greeted her as they reined in their horses. Hope we might see you out here. What's happened? Evelyn demanded, dismounting quickly. One of Turner's men stepped forward. Caught two men trying to poison your spring, madam. They ran when we challenged them, and there was some shooting, but nobody was hit. Poison the spring? Evelyn repeated, horror washing over her at the thought. Not just her cattle, but all the wildlife that depended on that water would have died. Got one of them, the other ranch hand said with grim satisfaction. Jenkins works for Thompson. Sheriff's got him in custody. The other one got away, the sheriff added. But Jenkins has been talking, trying to save his own skin. Claims Thompson paid him to do it. Zeke's expression hardened. Will he testify to that? Says he will, the sheriff confirmed. Between his statement and this, he held up a sack that clinked with glass bottles. We've got enough to arrest Thompson for conspiracy and attempted property destruction. Relief washed over Evelyn, so intense she felt momentarily lightheaded. "You're going to arrest him first thing tomorrow," Sheriff Davis assured her. "Wanted to let you know tonight, though. Figured you'd sleep better." As the sheriff and Turner's men departed, taking the evidence and their prisoner with them, the first fat drops of rain began to fall from the storm clouds that had been gathering all evening. Evelyn tilted her face upward, letting the cool water wash away some of the tension she'd been carrying for so long. "It's really over," she said softly, almost unable to believe it. "Almost," Zeke cautioned. "Thompson still has money and influence. But with Jenkins's testimony and the physical evidence, he'll have a hard time wiggling out of this." They rode back to the ranch in the increasing rain, arriving soaked but exhilarated by the night's developments. Inside the house, Evelyn built up the fire while Zeke fetched towels. "Here," he said, handing her one. "You're shivering." As she reached for the towel, their fingers brushed, and something electric passed between them. Suddenly, Evelyn was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the intensity in his gaze as it met hers. "Zeke," she said softly, "before we were interrupted earlier." His expression softened. "I was about to cross a line." "Maybe it's a line that needs crossing," Evelyn suggested, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he must hear it. For a moment, Zeke remained perfectly still, searching her face as if looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, he slowly raised his hand to her cheek, just as he had on the porch. "I didn't come here looking for this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Didn't expect to find someone who would make me want to stop drifting. But from that first day, watching you stand your ground against Thompson, something inside me recognized something in you."
"What?"
Evelyn asked, barely breathing.
"Home," Zeke said simply.
"Not a place, but a feeling. Like I'd been wandering for years, only to find what I was looking for in the last place I expected." The words touched something deep within Evelyn, a longing she had buried beneath practicality and determination. Since Michael's death, she had convinced herself that love was a luxury she could no longer afford, that survival and preserving her parents' legacy were all that mattered. But standing here with Zeke, his hand warm against her cheek, she realized that she had been surviving but not living. The walls she had built around her heart had protected her from pain but had also kept out the possibility of joy. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not of you, but of this. Of feeling again. Of losing again." "I know," Zeke said gently. "I'm scared too. Been alone so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else." His thumb brushed lightly across her cheekbone. "But I'm willing to try if you are." Instead of answering with words, Evelyn raised herself on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, both of them uncertain, but it quickly deepened as years of loneliness and longing gave way to newfound hope. When they finally parted, both breathing harder, Zeke rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since about the third day," he admitted with a small smile. Evelyn laughed softly. "I've been fighting the urge for at least that long." "Always were stubborn," he teased, his arms still around her waist. "Had to be," she replied. "Still do with Thompson." At the mention of the banker, Zeke's expression grew more serious. "Whatever happens with Thompson, I want you to know I'm here for as long as you want me. Not just for the fight, but for whatever comes after." The simple declaration, with all its implied promise for the future, both thrilled and terrified Evelyn. For so long, she had defined herself by her struggle to save the ranch. The possibility of success and of a life that included more than just survival was almost dizzying in its potential. "I want you to stay," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "Not just for the ranch, but for me. For us." The smile that spread across Zeke's face transformed his features, erasing years of solitary wandering in an instant. He kissed her again, this time with more certainty, and Evelyn felt the last of her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. Outside, the rain fell steadily, washing the land clean and bringing new life to soil parched by drought and fire. Within the warm circle of Zeke's arms, Evelyn felt a similar renewal, a heart long dormant awakening to the possibility of love once more. Thompson's arrest the next morning sent shockwaves through the community. The banker was released on bail by midday, but the damage to his reputation was immediate and severe. Several prominent citizens withdrew their accounts from his bank, and the Silverton Mining Company quickly distanced itself from him, issuing a public statement condemning any illegal actions taken in their name. Evelyn and Zeke heard the news when Samuel Turner rode out to the ranch shortly after noon. "Thought you'd want to know," Turner said, clearly enjoying being the bearer of good tidings. Thompson's facing serious charges. Jenkins signed a full confession this morning, detailing not just the poison attempt but the fire as well. Says Thompson paid him $50 to do both. "Will it stick?" Zeke asked, ever practical. "Men like Thompson have ways of escaping justice." "Ordinarily, I'd agree," Turner replied. "But the poison was found in his possession, and one of the bottles has his fingerprints on it. Seems he handled it directly before giving it to Jenkins. And there were witnesses who saw them meeting behind the bank the day before." "It's really over then," Evelyn said, still hardly able to believe it. "As good as," Turner confirmed. "Even if he somehow avoids prison, his reputation is ruined. The bank's board of directors is meeting this afternoon to discuss his removal. And the mining company's representative made it clear they no longer have any interest in your land, Miss Moore." After Turner left, Evelyn and Zeke stood in the yard, absorbing the news. The relief was almost overwhelming, months of fear and uncertainty lifting like morning mist under the summer sun. "What now?" Zeke asked quietly. Evelyn looked around at her ranch, seeing it with new eyes. The fences Zeke had repaired, the fields they had planted together, the barn they had saved from the storm. No longer just a burden to be carried or a legacy to be preserved, but a home to be cherished and improved. A future to be built. "Now," she said, taking his hand, "we build something together." "If that's what you want." Zeke's fingers tightened around hers. "It's all I want." The months that followed were busy ones for the Crescent Moon Ranch. With Thompson's threat removed, Evelyn and Zeke turned their full attention to making the ranch profitable again. The crops they had planted yielded well, providing feed for the cattle through the winter. The herd, carefully tended, began to increase naturally, supplemented by several quality breeding bulls Zeke purchased with money he had saved from previous jobs. Word spread in the territory about the spring-fed creek on the property, and Evelyn began selling water rights to neighboring ranchers during dry periods, a steady source of income that helped fund further improvements to the ranch. Samuel Turner proved to be a valuable ally and friend, sharing equipment and knowledge freely. Through it all, Evelyn and Zeke's relationship deepened and strengthened. They worked side by side during the day and spent evenings on the porch, talking about the future they were building together. The kiss they had shared the night of Thompson's arrest led to more, each discovering in the other a passion neither had expected to find again. They were married in early October, with Samuel Turner standing as witness alongside the few friends Evelyn had in town who had remained loyal through her struggles. The ceremony was simple, held on the porch of the ranch house with the land they both loved spread out before them. "Never thought I'd wear a dress again," Evelyn whispered to Zeke as they stood together afterward, receiving congratulations from their small group of well-wishers. "You look beautiful in it," he replied, his eyes warm with admiration. "Though I have to admit, I'm partial to you in trousers too." She laughed, feeling lighter and happier than she had in years. "Good, because I'm not planning to wear dresses for everyday ranch work, husband or no husband." "Wouldn't expect anything less," Zeke said with a grin. "It's that spirit that made me fall in love with you in the first place." As their guests departed, Leaving them alone for their first evening as husband and wife, Evelyn found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From her initial distrust to their current partnership, it had been a path neither could have anticipated. "What are you thinking about?" Zeke asked, coming to stand beside her as she gazed out at the land bathed in the golden light of sunset. "About how differently things might have turned out," she replied honestly, "if you hadn't decided to stay that day." Zeke's arms slipped around her waist, drawing her close to his side. "I'd like to say it was a noble decision, but the truth is, I couldn't have ridden away if I'd tried. Something about you, about this place, just felt right from the beginning." Evelyn leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid strength of him. "I'm glad you stayed, even though I didn't make it easy for you." "The things worth having rarely come easy," Zeke observed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And you, Evelyn Callahan, were absolutely worth the wait." The name, her new name, still sounded strange to her ears, but wonderfully right at the same time. Not a replacement for who she had been, but an addition, another layer to her identity, another chapter in her story. As they stood together watching the sun sink below the horizon, Evelyn thought about the walls she had built around her heart after losing Michael, walls meant to protect her from further pain, but which had also kept out the possibility of joy. Zeke had not torn those walls down by force, but had simply remained steadfastly present until she chose to lower them herself. In doing so, she had found not just a partner in managing the ranch, but a companion for the journey ahead, whatever it might bring. The future stretched before them, full of both challenges and possibilities, but for the first time in years, Evelyn looked toward it with anticipation rather than dread. "Come on, wife," Zeke said softly as the last light faded from the sky. "Tomorrow's soon enough to get back to work. Tonight is for us." Hand in hand, they walked into the house, their house now, to begin the next chapter of their story together. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the open window of the ranch house, bringing a smile to Evelyn's face as she kneaded bread dough in the kitchen. Outside, Zeke was teaching their 4-year-old son, James, how to brush down his first pony, while 2-year-old Sarah toddled after them, determined not to be left out of any activity involving her beloved father and brother. So much had changed in 5 years. The Crescent Moon Ranch had flourished under their joint care, expanding to include adjacent land purchased from Samuel Turner when he decided to retire to California. The original ranch house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, with a new wing adding 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Bernard Thompson had eventually been convicted of conspiracy and attempted property destruction, though his sentence had been light, just 6 months in the territorial prison. Upon his release, he had left the area, his reputation and fortune largely destroyed. The last Evelyn had heard, he was trying to rebuild his life in Colorado, far from the community where his crimes were known. The Silverton Mining Company had found other water sources and continued its operations, but under new management that proved more respectful of local landowners' rights. The railroad spur had been completed, making it easier for ranchers in the area to get their cattle to market. Evelyn placed the bread dough in a pan to rise and wiped her hands on her apron. Through the window, she watched as Zeke lifted Sarah onto his shoulders, the little girl's delighted squeals carrying clearly to where Evelyn stood. James, serious and focused like his mother, continued brushing the pony with great concentration, determined to do the job right. They made a beautiful picture, her family, on the land she had fought so hard to keep. There had been difficult times, of course. The winter after they married had been particularly harsh, and they had lost some cattle to the cold. A drought 2 years ago had threatened their crops. Just last spring, Zeke had been thrown from a horse and broken his leg, leaving Evelyn to manage much of the spring work alone while he recovered. But through it all, they had faced each challenge together, finding in their partnership a strength neither possessed alone. Zeke had kept his promise to stay, becoming as devoted to the land as Evelyn herself. And she had learned to open her heart fully again, discovering that love was not a finite resource to be hoarded, but an ever-renewing wellspring that grew stronger with sharing. Evelyn stepped out onto the porch, shading her eyes against the bright Arizona sun. "Lunch is almost ready," she called. Zeke looked up, his face breaking into the warm smile that still made her heart beat faster after 5 years of marriage. "Coming," he called back, swinging Sarah down from his shoulders and taking her small hand in his. "James, time to finish up." The boy nodded solemnly, giving the pony one final pat before carefully putting away the brush exactly as his father had shown him. At 4, he was already showing signs of the same determination that had allowed his mother to hold onto the ranch against all odds. As her family approached the house, Evelyn felt a wave of gratitude so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. For all the hardships, for all the struggles, she wouldn't change a moment of the path that had led her here to this land, to this man, to these children who represented the future of everything she and Zeke had built together. "What's that look for?" Zeke asked as he reached the porch, Sarah now perched on his hip. "Just thinking how lucky I am," Evelyn replied honestly. "How different things might have been if a certain stubborn cowboy hadn't decided to stay and help, even when I insisted I didn't need it." Zeke's free arms slipped around her waist, drawing her close for a quick kiss. "Luckiest day of my life, riding onto this ranch," he said softly. "Even if a certain stubborn rancher did point a rifle at me." "Mama pointed a rifle?" James asked, his eyes wide with surprise as he joined them on the porch. Evelyn laughed, ruffling her son's dark hair. "That's a story for when you're older, sweetheart. Right now, it's time for lunch." As they entered the house together, Evelyn cast one last glance at the land stretching out before them, the land that had been her burden and her salvation, the backdrop for a love story she could never have imagined in those dark days after her father's death. The walls she had built around her heart were long gone now, replaced by the joyful chaos of family life and the steady, unwavering love of the man who had refused to be driven away by her initial resistance. In their place was something far stronger, a home built not just of wood and stone, but of shared dreams, mutual respect, and a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. "I love you," she said quietly to Zeke as the children ran ahead into the kitchen. He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the way she had come to adore. "I love you too. Always will." It was enough, more than enough. A promise for today and all the days to come, as enduring as the land they both loved and the life they had built upon it together.